The skies over Earth were still, eerily so, as the Zorkari fleet descended into orbit. For weeks, the world had been aware of their approach. Sightings of unidentified craft in space, strange signals intercepted by astronomers, rumors whispered in dark corners of government agencies. At first, there was skepticism. It could be some new weapon, a misinterpreted message, or even just a prank. But as the days passed, the world's governments realized the truth. They were coming. Earth's defense systems, once considered the pinnacle of human achievement, stood little chance against the overwhelming power of the Zorkari. Their ships were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. Massive, sleek, and surrounded by an aura of energy that defied understanding, their motherships were the size of small cities. Their technology seemed to exist in a realm of science far beyond humanity's reach. When the Zorkari broadcast their ultimatum, the message was simple and chilling. Surrender your planet to us, or face extinction. No threats, no boasts, just cold, unfeeling certainty. The world fell into a panic. Governments scrambled to respond, some advocating for immediate negotiations, while others called for a global defense mobilization. In every corner of the Earth, people reacted with a mix of disbelief, fear, and anger. But for all the panic, there was one underlying truth that seemed to unite all of humanity in this dark moment. Earth had never faced anything like this before, and no one knew if they were ready. In Washington, D.C., the president convened an emergency meeting with military leaders, scientists, and intelligence agencies. Tension hung heavy in the room, as projections of the Zorkari fleet filled the large screens on the walls. Their sheer numbers and power were staggering, and all of Earth's combined forces seemed like nothing more than a futile gesture in comparison. "Are we really supposed to fight this?" General Clark asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "Our weapons, our best fighters, won't stand a chance." Dr. Linda Hayes, one of the top scientists involved in the study of the incoming aliens, shook her head slowly. "They're not just technologically advanced," she said, her eyes focused on the data. "Their ships generate energy fields that absorb our most advanced missiles and laser weapons. Their armor is virtually indestructible. Whatever we have, if we try to fight them head-on, it's not going to work." The president, a seasoned leader, stared at the screens for a long moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "Then we have to think differently," he said, his voice resolute. "We won't win through strength. We'll win through something they can't comprehend. We'll fight them on our terms." The room fell silent. No one knew what those terms were, but one thing was certain. Humans were not going to lie down and accept annihilation. The notion of surrender was anathema to the spirit of humanity, a species that had survived against the odds time and time again. They had always fought back, against nature, against disease, against even their own divisiveness. Far beyond the government bunkers and military strategy rooms, ordinary people across the globe were coming to the same realization. From the back alleys of New Delhi to the busy streets of Sao Paulo, and from the frozen tundra of Alaska to the sun-drenched coasts of Australia, the same silent vow was shared. Humanity would not give up without a fight. In the quiet of their homes, people gathered their families close. Some prayed. Others prepared their communities, organizing makeshift weapons, securing food and supplies. But no one believed they were going to be the ones to lose. Even as the Zorkari ships darkened the skies, humanity was starting to understand the one truth the invaders hadn't accounted for. Earth wasn't just a planet with a people. It was a world of relentless, stubborn fighters, individuals who would never give up, no matter how hopeless the odds seemed. And so, in the calm before the storm, there was no panic, only quiet resolve. The fight was about to begin. The first wave of the Zorkari invasion was swift and brutal. Motherships, gleaming like dark monoliths, descended over Earth's major cities, blocking out the sun. With their massive ships in orbit and their ground forces deployed with terrifying efficiency, the Zorkari began their conquest with no mercy. They showed no interest in communication or negotiation. It was clear they had come to claim Earth as their own. The initial attack was overwhelming. Energy blasts from alien cannons flattened entire blocks, and Zorkari foot soldiers, humanoid but taller, stronger, and more agile than any human, marched through the streets, gunning down anyone who dared to oppose them. Panic spread like wildfire. Cities once bustling with life became war zones as the earth trembled beneath the weight of alien boots. But as the Zorkari advanced, something unexpected began to happen. Humans, though outmatched, didn't scatter in fear. They fought back. In New York, a group of civilians who had sought shelter in a subway station decided to make a stand. Armed with nothing more than a few pipes, a stolen firearm, and a heap of pure anger, they managed to ambush a small Zorkari unit that had been patrolling the streets. The aliens, unused to being attacked in this manner, were caught off guard by the raw, unpredictable ferocity of the humans. The small victory sent shockwaves throughout the city. If a few humans could fight back, surely others could too. In Paris, a group of resistance fighters, a mix of soldiers and civilians, made their move. They knew they couldn't match the Zorkari in open combat, but they didn't need to. They used the city's architecture to their advantage, setting traps and creating distractions. With careful planning, they managed to sabotage an alien energy core, causing a temporary blackout across the invaders' operations. It was only a small win, but it was enough to send a message. Earth was not going down without a fight. Around the world, pockets of resistance began to form. What was once chaos now began to take on a more organized form. In Tokyo, a group of hackers infiltrated the Zorkari's communications network, sending false orders to their forces, confusing their ranks. In Rio, the human spirit was unleashed in full force as guerrilla warfare tactics, hidden traps, ambushes, and hit-and-run strikes began to cripple the aliens' ground units. People fought in ways the Zorkari couldn't comprehend. They weren't fighting for territory or for power. They were fighting for survival. The Zorkari, initially confident in their victory, began to experience something they hadn't anticipated: resistance that refused to break. Alien technology, advanced though it wasn't invulnerable. Humans were quick to adapt, reverse engineering weapons and armor they scavenged from the Zorkari wreckage. And as they learned more about their alien enemies, they began to exploit weaknesses the invaders didn't know they had. What truly stunned the Zorkari was humanity's resolve. They had thought humans weak, divided, and incapable of mounting a serious defense. But what they hadn't counted on was the human will to fight, not just to survive, but to protect the very heart of their world. Cities that had been flattened were rebuilt by the very people who had once been terrified of their alien invaders. They showed no sign of giving up. In the heart of every battle, from the crowded streets of London to the dense jungles of Africa, the same determination burned. Humans might not have the best technology, but they had something far more powerful: each other. As the first few weeks of the invasion passed, the Zorkari commanders were starting to understand one crucial fact: they had underestimated humanity. And now, they were in a war they hadn't prepared for. As the days turned into weeks, it became clear that the Zorkari were not going to achieve their victory as easily as they had anticipated. Earth's cities, now scarred by alien fire, had become battlegrounds. But rather than surrendering to the overwhelming force of the invaders, humanity had found a way to fight back. The Zorkari, accustomed to fighting well-organized armies, were struggling to combat the chaotic, unpredictable nature of human warfare. In the urban sprawl of Los Angeles, a team of resistance fighters had set up a series of hidden outposts beneath the city's infrastructure. Armed with nothing more than salvaged alien tech and homemade explosives, they launched surprise strikes on the Zorkari supply lines. The invaders, who had thought themselves invincible, were caught off guard by the guerrilla tactics humans had mastered. The attacks were small, but effective. A car bomb here, a sniper shot there, an ambush on an isolated patrol. The Zorkari forces were trained to respond to direct threats, not to the guerrilla tactics the humans had adopted. But it was more than just the surprise of these attacks. It was the relentless persistence of them. Humans weren't simply fighting with weapons. They were fighting with the indomitable will to protect their homes, their families, and everything they held dear. Across the globe, similar resistance movements sprouted up. In the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, small groups of soldiers and civilians set traps and made use of the terrain, luring Zorkari patrols into the dense undergrowth where their advanced technology was less effective. The alien soldiers, who had once dominated the battlefield with their speed and strength, found themselves slowed and disoriented in unfamiliar environments. In the cold northern regions of Canada, groups of survivors had taken refuge in the vast wilderness, creating hidden bases deep in the forests. They built traps and ambushes in the snow, using the harsh conditions to their advantage. The Zorkari, unaccustomed to the cold, struggled to track and fight in these conditions, while the humans thrived. For every alien that fell, 2 more were forced to retreat. The Zorkari commanders, growing frustrated, began sending more advanced troops, but they quickly learned that it wasn't just their technology that made humans dangerous. It was their adaptability. While the aliens could plan for nearly every outcome, they hadn't anticipated the sheer creativity of human minds. A group of engineers in Berlin managed to create makeshift EMP devices that could disable alien equipment for short periods of time. In Egypt, a small band of soldiers used the ancient pyramids as cover, setting up defensive positions that turned the Zorkari's own heavy artillery against them. But it wasn't just tactics that were turning the tide. It was the unity of the human race. Across every continent, races, religions, and political ideologies faded into the background as humanity realized that survival depended on working together. The resistance movements coordinated efforts on a scale never before seen. Communications were passed from one group to the next, ensuring that no attack was without purpose and no victory went unshared. As the human resistance continued to grow in strength, the Zorkari began to lose their edge. Alien forces, once confident in their superiority, were becoming more disorganized and weary. They were trained for full-scale warfare, for domination and total destruction, but what they were encountering on Earth was a force of nature that they simply didn't understand. Humanity, for all its flaws and divisions, had one thing that no alien empire had counted on: the ability to fight with heart, to rise after every defeat, and to never give in. The Zorkari were powerful, but humanity was relentless. And in the shadows, a new sense of hope began to take root. As small victories piled up, humans began to believe, maybe, just maybe, they could win this war. The battle was escalating, but so were the stakes. The Zorkari, once in complete control, were starting to lose ground in key regions. What had begun as isolated skirmishes now grew into full-scale resistance operations. The invaders, unable to keep up with the ingenuity and unpredictability of humanity, began to make mistakes. But despite these setbacks, humanity's victory was far from assured. Earth's most advanced weaponry had proved useless against the Zorkari's advanced energy shields and seemingly indestructible armor. They needed something new, something that could turn the tide. In a quiet, hidden laboratory beneath the ruins of a once bustling city, a team of brilliant scientists and engineers, many former military personnel, others civilian innovators, gathered for a daring plan. Among them was Dr. Emily Carter, an astrobiologist who had studied alien species for most of her life, though never in the context of warfare. But that's exactly what she was about to face. "I've been working with a team of physicists and engineers to analyze the alien tech we've captured," Dr. Carter said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "The energy shields the Zorkari use have one flaw: a resonance frequency. If we can create a weapon that matches this frequency, we can destabilize their shields and make their ships vulnerable." The room fell into an uneasy silence. The idea was nothing short of revolutionary, but it was a long shot. The Zorkari's technology was unlike anything humans had ever encountered. Even if they could find a resonance frequency, there was no guarantee their weapon would work. "Is this even possible?" asked Colonel David Ruiz, the leader of the military group supporting the project. "We're talking about a frequency that could tear apart their entire defense system." Dr. Carter nodded. "It's a calculated risk, but it's the only option we have left. We've studied their ships enough to know that their energy fields are not indestructible. They have weaknesses, and we just need to exploit them." The plan was audacious, to say the least. A group of engineers worked tirelessly to design a prototype, a device that could generate a pulse at the Zorkari energy shield's resonance frequency. It was going to be a one-shot weapon. If it worked, they could disable an entire fleet of Zorkari ships. If it failed, they would have no backup plan. The risks were monumental, but humanity had no choice but to act. As the weapon neared completion, resistance groups from all over the world began to rally. The idea that this single device could turn the tide of the war inspired new waves of courage. People who had once been afraid to fight now volunteered for the most dangerous missions. It was an all-or-nothing effort. If the weapon worked, it would be the key to humanity's survival. If it didn't, the Zorkari would crush them. The team assembled in a remote desert base, where they would launch the prototype against a Zorkari mothership hovering in low orbit. The plan was to use a makeshift launch platform to send the resonance pulse directly at the alien craft, while a small team of soldiers provided a distraction on the ground to keep the Zorkari forces occupied. As the countdown began, there was a palpable tension in the air. Soldiers and scientists alike knew the enormity of what was at stake. If this failed, they would be back at square one, facing an enemy they had no hope of defeating. But for the first time since the war began, there was something more than fear in the air. It was hope. Hope that humanity could truly change the course of the battle. Hope that, against all odds, they could win. The test of humanity's newly developed weapon was over in a flash, but its effects reverberated across the battlefield like a shockwave. When the resonance pulse hit the Zorkari mothership, the massive craft shuddered, its energy shield destabilizing in an instant. The alien vessel, once invulnerable, was now exposed, vulnerable to human weaponry. The resistance forces, following through on their carefully laid plans, launched a full assault. Missiles, explosive charges, and ground forces surged towards the crippled mothership, unleashing destruction like never before. The victory was short-lived, though, as the Zorkari were far from defeated. In fact, they were enraged. The Zorkari High Command, witnessing the sudden vulnerability of their ships, responded with terrifying precision. They had underestimated humanity's ingenuity, and now they would unleash their most devastating weapon, something designed to crush Earth's resistance in a single, unrelenting blow. Within hours, the Zorkari began deploying a new type of weapon. They released massive bioengineered creatures from their motherships, monstrous hybrids bred for sheer destruction. These creatures towered over any human soldier, their armored hides nearly impenetrable, their claws sharp enough to tear through steel. They moved with unnatural speed, their eyes glowing with an eerie, malevolent intelligence. These bioweapons were the Zorkari's ultimate response to humanity's ingenuity. Pure, unstoppable force. In the streets of London, one such creature emerged, crushing buildings beneath its enormous feet as it howled into the night. The air was thick with the sound of destruction. Humans, unprepared for such an overwhelming assault, scrambled to fight back, but their weapons, designed for smaller, more conventional battles, had no effect on the creature's tough hide. It was a terrifying sight, an unstoppable force of nature, a living nightmare unleashed on their world. Elsewhere, similar creatures rampaged through the streets of New York, tearing through military barricades and mowing down resistance fighters with brutal efficiency. Entire city blocks were decimated, and with each new creature released, the hope that had started to bloom in the wake of the successful weapon test began to wither. The Zorkari had never been this vicious, and humanity was beginning to realize the true scale of the invaders' wrath. Their response was swift and devastating. They weren't going to simply lose. They would annihilate Earth's resistance in a way that would leave nothing behind but the remnants of a broken, helpless world. But even as the creatures tore through the streets, a fire began to ignite within humanity. The survivors, beaten and battered, would not give up. People who had once lived in fear now gathered together, their resolve hardened in the face of overwhelming destruction. The world had been pushed to the brink, and though they were small against the might of the Zorkeri, humans had something the aliens could never replicate: a will to survive, a determination to fight, and an unshakable belief that they could not be conquered. In underground bunkers and hidden bases across every corner of Earth, the resistance rallied. It was time for humanity's final stand, and though the odds were insurmountable, the people of Earth were about to make one last, desperate push to reclaim their world from the invaders. The war had reached its breaking point. Earth's cities lay in ruins, the once vibrant landscapes now scared by the brutal onslaught of the Zorkeri bioweapons. The alien creatures, monstrous and unstoppable, had torn through the human defenses, leaving a path of devastation in their wake. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, humanity was not broken. They had survived this long through grit, determination, and the unwavering belief that they could still turn the tide. The resistance, now scattered and battered, had retreated into a series of underground bases and hidden bunkers. In these dark, cold spaces, a final plan was being formed, a last desperate strike against the Zorkeri's command center. It was a mission so dangerous that only the most committed would even consider volunteering. There was no time for second chances, no time for hesitation. It was now or never. Colonel David Ruiz, who had led countless missions, stood before the gathered resistance fighters. His face, worn from weeks of continuous battle, reflected the weight of what was to come. The moment of truth had arrived. "We're going to strike at the heart of their operation," he said, his voice steady, yet filled with a quiet fire. "The Zorkeri may have superior technology, they may have armies of bioweapons, but they do not have what we have. Our will to survive, our unity. They thought they could crush us, but we've shown them that we will never back down. Now it's time to take the fight to them." Around him, faces filled with determination nodded in agreement. These were not soldiers, but ordinary people, farmers, engineers, doctors, who had been forced into this fight by the relentless need to protect their home. Each one of them had a story, a family, a reason to keep going. But now, they were all bound by one singular purpose: to end this war. Dr. Emily Carter, the scientist behind the resonance weapon that had exposed the Zorkeri's weakness, stood next to Ruiz. "We've discovered the location of their main command center," she said, holding up a holographic map of the area. "It's deep in the Arctic Circle, hidden beneath layers of ice and rock. We believe their control systems are housed there, and if we can destroy it, we can cripple their entire fleet." The plan was simple but perilous. A small group of elite fighters, equipped with stolen Zorkeri technology, and the last of their own weapons, would infiltrate the command center, plant explosives, and destroy the heart of the Zorkeri's operation. The rest of the resistance would keep the enemy occupied, drawing attention away from the team's movements. "Once we breach their defenses, there's no turning back," Colonel Ruiz continued. "We might not all make it out, but we have to do this. For our families, for our planet." With grim determination, the group set out for the Arctic base, crossing frozen terrain and evading Zorkeri patrols. The weather was harsh, the cold biting at their skin, but they pushed forward. Every step, every breath, carried the weight of humanity's future. As they reached the base, they could see the towering alien structures rising from the ice, imposing and foreboding, yet strangely silent. The team moved like shadows, slipping through the shadows, planting charges, and avoiding detection at all costs. Inside the base, the Zorkeri were concentrated around their central control hub, completely unaware of the impending attack. At the final moment, the team reached the heart of the base, an enormous, complex system of energy reactors and communication arrays. Dr. Carter quickly set the detonators, her hands shaking with anticipation. The time had come. Humanity's last hope lay in this act. With a deep breath, she pressed the final button. The explosive charge set by Dr. Carter hummed with energy, its countdown ticking away. Each second felt like an eternity. The resistance team stood in the heart of the Zorkari command center, surrounded by glowing alien consoles and towering machinery that hummed with the promise of death. The room was dim, lit only by the faint blue glow of the alien tech that surrounded them. They had made it this far, but now the true test awaited. Time was slipping through their fingers. Colonel Ruiz looked at his team, each of them with a look of steely determination in their eyes. No one spoke. They all knew what was at stake. They had come so far. They had fought so hard. The thought of failure was unthinkable. The fate of their families, their homes, their world rested on the success of this mission. They had no backup plans, no reinforcements. This was it. A low hum echoed through the command center as the countdown reached its final seconds. "Ready," Ruiz muttered, his voice steady, though his heart pounded in his chest. Dr. Carter, her hands shaking despite her best efforts to remain calm, glanced at the control panel. The countdown clock was now at 10 seconds. They had no choice but to stay put. They had no way of knowing if the explosion would be enough to completely cripple the Zorkari fleet. But it had to work. "Everyone, stay focused," Ruiz said. "We get out once the explosion hits, and we make sure the Zorkari don't track us. No matter what happens, we stick together." The sound of alien footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, growing louder, closer. The Zorkari had detected something was amiss. They had sent reinforcements to investigate the breach. It was only a matter of time before they found them. They had to move fast. 5 seconds. Dr. Carter's breath hitched. The countdown reached its final seconds, and her mind raced. She thought of the families they had left behind. She thought of her young daughter, safe, she hoped, in a hidden bunker somewhere, but she couldn't shake the fear of never seeing her again. This was their only shot. Failure meant the Zorkari would take everything. She swallowed hard, pushed the thoughts away, and focused. 3 seconds. She pressed the final activation button, the hum of the device increasing to a sharp, intense pitch. A red light flashed on the control panel. The countdown was complete. "Now," Ruiz shouted, and the team moved in a coordinated frenzy, racing toward the exit. The base, though alien and unfamiliar, still had an airlock-style door that they had used to enter. They had to make it back to their extraction point before the Zorkari arrived. The ground shook beneath their feet as the charge detonated. A blinding flash of light erupted from the center of the command base, followed by a violent explosion that sent shockwaves through the ground. The Zorkari systems flickered, then went dark. The entire facility rumbled, shaking with the force of the blast, and the once imposing alien machines began to fall silent. "Move, move, move," Ruiz barked, pulling Dr. Carter toward the exit. The blast had done its job, but they had to escape. They had to survive. But as the resistance team rushed through the halls, they could hear the Zorkari forces closing in. Their time was running out. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the explosion reverberated through the Zorkari base. The walls of the command center buckled, and alien technology sparked and fizzled out, its once powerful hum now replaced by eerie silence. For a brief moment, it seemed like time itself had stopped. The light from the explosion filled every corner of the compound, casting shadows that danced like ghosts on the walls. "Keep moving," Ruiz shouted, grabbing Dr. Carter by the arm and pulling her toward the exit. Their mission was far from over. The Zorkari weren't just going to let them escape. The countdown had just begun for them as well. If the enemy forces didn't catch them, they'd be stranded in a collapsing enemy stronghold. The team sprinted through the corridors, the sound of their boots echoing through the silence. Behind them, the base was starting to fall apart, pieces of alien machinery crashing to the floor with deafening clatters. Sparks erupted from the damaged systems, casting flashes of light as fire and smoke began to fill the hallways. "Keep your heads down," Ruse barked as they reached the airlock, but as the door began to open, the sound of alien voices reached their ears. Zorkari soldiers. The resistance had triggered the security systems, and the base's remaining forces had mobilized for a counterattack. Without hesitation, the team dove into the nearest passageway, hoping to evade the oncoming patrols. Their breathing was ragged, the tension in the air almost suffocating. Every step felt like a race against death, and every corner they rounded seemed to bring them closer to the enemy. The enemy had the numbers, the technology, and the strength. But humanity had something far more dangerous: the will to fight for survival. Suddenly, the air shifted as the cold outside breeze hit them. They had reached the surface. The team emerged from the depths of the base into the freezing Arctic wasteland, the stark white snow stretching out before them like a vast, unyielding ocean. The Zorkari would follow. They had to move faster. "We're almost there," Ruse said, voice grim. His eyes scanned the horizon, where a small team of resistance fighters were waiting in a vehicle to extract them. They weren't out of danger yet. The snowstorm howled in the distance, making it harder to see, but the resistance vehicle was in sight, its headlights cutting through the white expanse like a beacon of hope. But as the team made a run for it, the sharp, unnatural screech of Zorkari warships sliced through the wind. "They'd found us," one of the soldiers shouted, pointing toward the sky. Two Zorkari dropships descended rapidly, their weapons aimed at the fleeing humans. Ruiz's mind raced. There was no time for hesitation. He turned to the team. "We're going to make a run for it, but we need to hold them off. Dr. Carter, get to the vehicle now." Dr. Carter nodded, already sprinting toward the vehicle, as the rest of the team dug in and began to lay down cover fire. The dropships were closing in, their guns blazing. Just as the Zorkari forces descended upon them, the resistance vehicle roared to life. The engine thrummed, pulling them toward safety. Ruiz turned to give one last look at the destruction they'd caused. The collapse of the Zorkari command center, their mission complete, and the war finally tipping in humanity's favor. They'd done it. Against all odds, the resistance had won. As the vehicle sped away, the sound of explosions echoed in the distance, signaling the end of the Zorkari's reign over Earth. The human race had survived. And for the first time in a long while, hope flickered in the hearts of every survivor.